What's up? This is Tom Froming from TwinsDaily.com, and earlier this evening I spoke with Matthew Lenz, also of Twins Daily, about the outfield. Not really a focal point of the Twins off-season at this point, but some topics certainly worth discussing, including Byron Buxton, always a hot topic among Twins fans, and the potential for an Eddie Rosario trade, which there's been tons of smoke, lots of speculation, so we gave our kind of 2 cents on that. So check it out. This is a good conversation we had. For more on that article I referenced, there's going to be a link to that in the description of this video, and also where you can find Matt on Twitter. So enjoy. But kind of what prompted this discussion and what we're going to focus on is an article that you recently wrote for Twins Daily. Do you kind of want to give some background information on that before we really dive into it?
Yeah, so I had been kind of interested in digging into trying to quantify Byron Buxton's defense. I think quantifying, putting like a numerical value on defense is very difficult. I know Fangraphs has some sort of formula they've come up with just to kind of give like a defensive point value to players. But in general, it's really hard to kind of understand, especially in baseball. There's so many other variables that can come into effect during the game. But yeah, I just wanted to try to quantify just how important Byron is to this team. I think most people are finally kind of getting on board with that. I know with his ups and downs, it's been a little bit of a struggle for people to see his value, but I think this year he finally figured out the hitting and so. But I was kind of looking at the defensive side of things and looking at using Baseball Savant. They have kind of an interesting metric where they take some data into the outfielder's jump, is what they call it, where they take into three different factors. The reaction time of the outfielder, which I believe they define as the first like 1.5 seconds that the ball is hit off the bat, and then the burst time, which is like the last or the 1.5 to 3 second range, and then the speed of the outfielder. And so that was just interesting to kind of get into. It's interesting stat to quantify because it's more than just counting errors and assists and things. Put a numerical value on probability to assign points, and so that was really interesting to look at. I used that to help quantify. I compared Barrios and Odorizzi were the only two pitchers I used for various reasons, but I compared their basically the OPS of balls hit to center field before Byron's injury and then after Byron's injury. So basically August and September. And if you read the article, you'll see that there's actually a significant difference. I know that Barrios was just struggling overall in August and part of September. So that obviously has something to do with it too. But it was kind of eye-opening to see the difference in balls hit to center field and the OPS for those two. I didn't include Pineda because of his suspension. It would have been a very small sample. I didn't include Gibson because of his was again just a really small sample, but between Barrios and Odorizzi alone, it was kind of eye-opening to see the difference that it seemed to make. And again, there's other factors, but I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Eye-opening is a good way to put it. And if anybody's interested in the actual numbers, and actually there's a few nice graphical elements that are included in that article. You can go check that out at Twins Daily. And I guess that the thing that really was surprising to me too is that it's not like Max Kepler. Obviously, he's not anywhere near in Buxton's kind of universe of defensive center fielder, but he usually grades out as a fairly above average. So for there to be such a gap between those two kind of caught me off guard a bit. But something you also mentioned that I found interesting was that reaction time / kind of jump element in which, as we all know, Byron Buxton is maybe the best defensive center fielder in the game, but he actually rates lower on those two stats, correct?
Yeah, he reaction time is the key. It's and again that's that 0 to 1.5 second window is again what baseball savant and it's something that if you're watching the game at home you don't really get to see because of the camera. In that 1.5
Hmm.
seconds the camera's not gonna be on Byron. You're not gonna be able to see that unless they just happen to be behind home plate. Um,
And that,
when it comes to his, of course, he makes up for that in his speed. But
mhm.
yeah, I thought that stood out to me as well. If as in terms of, that's something more, and I mentioned this in the article too. That's something that you can practice. I'm a JV baseball coach, and that's something that I practice with my outfielders is working on their jump and their reaction time. Whereas or that he shouldn't crash against a wall, and I don't know if we want him to change that part of it. But if he can fix that reaction time, um, I think he can. I think he can keep himself more healthy.
Yeah, that was my takeaway as well. Because if you think about it, even if he gets a little bit of a better jump and he's allowed to even slow up a half step before making a catch and then hitting the wall, that little half step slow, if he just gets better at beating the ball to the wall, that could be the difference between him hitting the wall at pretty much full speed and maybe getting a little bit of a slowdown as he catches up to the ball, which could keep him on the field.
Right, right, exactly. And the one play stands out to me. I don't remember. It was more mid-season, but he was running. I think forward, or he was for sure running forward, and then maybe to his right, and he dove, and his face against the grass. And that's another case where
Oh, yep.
maybe, and I think he had a concussion and he was out for 7 to 10 days maybe, but that's just another case right there where if he has a better jump or reaction time in that instance, it could either keep him on his feet or maybe he can just do a more of a, I guess, a finesse dive. I don't know if that's a thing, but where he doesn't have to go crashing into the ground either.
Yeah. I mean, his sprint speed is up over 30. I don't know what exactly it is, 30 feet per second. I mean, I suppose if you put it that way, if he could be only going 28 uh, at that moment that he makes that catch, maybe that impact is a little less. He probably still has to still leave his feet. But yeah, that little reaction time, I thought that was a really interesting observation and could really be something that unlocks some more playing time with him. But that's obviously been the main concern with Buxton. And we're going to talk about Eddie Rosario in a little bit. He's been a very hot topic guy in the outfield. It's kind of where we're basing this discussion. But before we get to that, I want to ask, do you feel like the Twins should be searching for more of a fourth outfielder who can serve as a backup center fielder to keep Kepler in right field should Buxton get injured?
I don't. Even I know we're going to talk about this later, but even with the idea that maybe Eddie Rosario isn't in a Twins uniform next year, I think as you mentioned before, Kepler didn't just do a like replacement level job in center field. He actually did a pretty good job in center field. Obviously, a big step down from Buxton, but I thought, and I think the data shows that he actually did really well in center field. Are there other center fielders and options maybe available better than him? Sure, but I think, and in terms of bringing in new guys this year, I think our focus really needs to be on the pitching side of things. Um, just looking over the roster, on the active roster in 2019, we had Jake Cave, who really put together a nice second half. And I don't think we can expect that out of Cave necessarily moving forward. But if you were to look at his minor league numbers, especially with the Yankees, he had a couple years where he put up similar type numbers at like AA and AAA. And so I don't know if we expect Cave to be that good again, but I think he can approach those levels and be a very serviceable and right fielder if Kepler were to move over to center. Um, of course, we have Marwin Gonzalez, who played an okay outfield. He's not he's definitely a further step down out and right, but we have him for another year, so I think that's another guy that we already have on our. I don't know how he hired on the. But if you really get into a pinch, those guys played a little bit of outfield. Um, and then the big thing to keep in mind, not on the active roster, you have Alex Kirilloff, who, at least in before 2019, was the number 15 prospect in all of baseball. And after a really good 2019, I got to imagine he's going to be closer to 10 or at least better than 15. And then you have Brent Rooker too, who I don't know how great a defender he is. In his last 2 years of minor league baseball, he did make 99 starts in left field. And in those starts, minor league stats they don't do a lot of the analytics stuff, but in those 99 starts, he only had 4 errors, and he was able to compile 6 outfield assists, which I know doesn't, that those kind of stats can be a little random, but so long story short, I think we have options. I think we have good enough options to move Kepler over to center, and then still have a viable right fielder on our roster.
Yeah, kind of. To me, it's an idea that sounds good in theory. That it would be nice to find a center fielder who would be your 4th outfielder option. But it's hard to figure out how that's going to fit on this Twins organization and team. You've got Marwin Gonzalez. Even with the extra guy, there's going to be 26-man rosters next year. Still might be tough. All these prospects, like you said, are coming up. And really, if you look at the free agent market in particular, guys who are reaching free agency are kind of outside of their center field years, I guess is a way to put it. It's guys in their mid to early 30s who've kind of lost a step by now. One guy that kind of stuck out to me was Cameron Maben, who had a really nice year with the Yankees in kind of short time, but he's 33. He still has some speed, but he's 33, and he's probably going to be looking for more of an opportunity than what the Twins can provide him. So there just didn't seem to be a very good solution, unless you're interested in Billy Hamilton, which I can't see him making sense for the Twins.
Yeah, and that is just to say how that would fit into our 2020 plan, and if we want to dedicate some of our resources to that.
Yeah, there's probably some minor league signing who's like a bump up from Ian Miller, who they had as a guy late in the year, who they can kind of have sitting in AAA just in case. But I don't see any big moves there. But one potential big move, everybody seems to be talking about, I've seen this everywhere now, is kind of speculation about Eddie Rosario being on the trade market. Have you kind of put any thought to that? And if so, what's your opinion?
Yeah, so it's funny. I've had this discussion, like you said, it's a very trending topic right now, and even going back into like September and August when he was really struggling. And I've always kind of said, not passionate one way or another. It'd be okay if we kept him. I'd be okay if we traded him. Ultimately, I think I would lean more towards the trade camp of things. And then in preparing for this, I really started kind of diving into looking into what he did this year and what he's kind of done throughout all of his career. And once I start looking at the numbers, I went from leaning towards the trade camp to dive in if anybody's interested. And that's part of it is, at this point, other teams have the same data that we do, and know how to use it better than you and I probably do, and they know they can use it to be more of a predictor than you and I probably can. And so this year he rated Baseball Savant. He was arguably the worst defensive outfielder in baseball this year. When we talk about not taking into account his arm, I know he has that ability to throw a guy out left field or right field or wherever he happens to be playing. But just from kind of going back to what we were talking about with Buxton, we had mentioned that Buxton's reaction time was bad. Well, just about everything that Rosario does, the route that he takes, the jump that he gets is bad in left field. In fact, I thought the most interesting statistics defensively is from Baseball Savant. They have a stat they call outs above average, and so what it does is it calculates, basically it gives you a score for the number of outs you make. So for example, if the catch probability is 25%, if you make the catch, you are credited with 0.75. If you don't make the catch, then you lose 0.25 points. And so these numbers fluctuate throughout the year as you're making catches or not making catches. The outs above closest player was at -13, so it wasn't even close.
Wow.
And then, I mean, I looked up a lot of the stuff that people always talk about. He's always been a free swinger, but it just seemed to be worse this year, and especially in the second half. And in fact, he did post his worst chase rate of his career this year. It was 4 points worse than his career average. He did have the lowest strikeout rate of his career, but then that was also followed by the highest contact of pitches outside of the strike zone of his career. And so there's he was just free swinging all year. He was making contact on bad pitches. I think it was that game 3 home run against the Yankees there where that pitch was just like way out of the strike zone,
Yeah.
but he gave us a little bit of life and a little bit of hope and knocked it out of the park. Somebody I was with was like, "Oh man, that reminds me of Vlad," and I was like, "Yeah, except Vlad was a lot more consistent at hitting that pitch."
Yes.
And I went on to Brooks Baseball and just looked at his batting average on pitches outside of the strike zone, and he hit 255, which is about 20 points lower than what his average was overall this year. And but he also posted the highest hard hit rate. And so when I look at all in the numbers show that he had a really bad year, but then you look at his lowest strikeout rate and his hard hit rate being the highest of his career, and it just feels like there's something there that can be tapped into. But at this point, he's 28 years old. He's only got 2 years left of arbitration. And if I remember right, I was trying to look it up, but I couldn't find anything too solid. But I believe him and the Twins have had a little bit of contract talks, but haven't come up with anything. I don't know if you know that for.
I know that MLB Trade Rumors is projecting his arbitration salary to be $8.9 million. So,
Okay.
With all those things that you mentioned, I consider this to be the low point of his value at this point.
Mm-hmm.
He was only worth 1.2 WAR according to Fangraphs. He only had a 103 WRC plus, in which 100 is league average. Like you mentioned on the defensive side, there's a lot of metrics that suggest he's not just bad, but flat out awful. Now, there might be some things that happen. I think he might have been playing hurt for a good chunk of the season. That might explain a few things. He's always just going to be a streaky hitter. And we saw him carry the team to some degree in May, and then just kind of disappear after that. But I have a hard time seeing another team really drooling over the idea of taking such a high variance player at a projected salary of nearly $9 million and giving up much of really established value. I think the Twins could trade Eddie Rosario for some pitching. I don't think they could trade him as a centerpiece in a deal for someone who's had major league success.
Yep, and that's exactly where I'm at too. I think he doesn't have a lot of value right now, and like you said, I just don't think we're going to be able to get much for him at this point. Like you said, he's just kind of in probably the lowest part of his career right now. And so, yeah, I think best case scenario is that we get some like middling reliever that can maybe not help us be, but at least part of the major league team, or rookie something. Because yeah, like you said, convincing a team to take him on at $9 million a year just isn't realistic. And so I would love to see him go. Well, I shouldn't say I would love to see him go, but I wouldn't mind seeing him go, but I just don't think it's something that can happen. One interesting thing that as I was playing around with Baseball Savant, they do this. They take a player's batted ball profile and like their barrel rates, how often they get under the ball or get above the ball, and then they create like this profile, and then you can type in a player's name and see who he relates to the most. And it happens to be that his contact profile is most similar to Frankie Lindor. And so that was one of the last things that I saw where I'm like, there's something here. We just have to find somebody that can tap into Eddie and sit down with him and just, I can't. I mean, I got to imagine, you were talking about Rosen earlier. I've got to imagine he's done that. He's shown him the data that says.
I think Eddie Rosario might be the guy who could potentially benefit the most from a new voice. That's not to say that's not to pin anything on Rosen or to try to paint it as though he wasn't able to get through to Rosario, but maybe they've been together for a few years now, and we haven't seen a lot of progress from that aspect of free swinging Eddie. It may be he wasn't even encouraged to tone that down. It's entirely possible. I don't know. But just kind of looking at the roster and thinking about who's a guy who could possibly benefit from a new voice, a new angle, I think Eddie Rosario stands out as much as anybody.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that, just because we've seen what he can do, and this year was just a really bad year for him. So just, like you said, who knows what messages he was or was not getting, and like you said, it's not to paint anybody into a bad light, because we just don't know, but it might just need to be a fresh voice telling him, showing him this data or talking to him or whatever it is. But yeah, I think you're right that he could be the biggest benefit after having the year that he did.
Yeah, so I still see, like you kind of put it, there's something there. We've seen Eddie Rosario play well. I'm not kind of giving up on him, but the Twins definitely have motivation to create some opportunities in the outfield in the future. So that kind of, all this smoke around him getting traded for pitching makes all the sense in the world. It just is really unbelievable to me that another team, there's not two dudes talking about another baseball team right now drooling over the idea of their team trading for Eddie Rosario. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, exactly. The only positive out of this is if the Twins do end up making it to the World Series next year, is if we need Nelson Cruz in the lineup, we could maybe put him out in left field, and his defense might not be any worse than Eddie, and we still have his bat.
Lining.
There's the silver lining.
Well, that seems about as good a spot as any to kind of wrap up shop here. Do you want to add anything else before we go?
Not anything with what we were talking. I just wanted to say thanks again for having me on. It was fun to dive into this stuff and to just kind of talk about Twins baseball rather than write about it, and hope that people read it. It was nice to have a conversation. So thanks for having me on, and I hope that we can do it again sometime.
Yeah, man, thanks for coming on. And anybody listening, I'm gonna chop this up, throw it onto YouTube with all nice and smooth. So go check that out. I'll share that on my Twitter page. But again, this has been Tom Fromling from TwinsDaily.com, and also Matthew Lenz of TwinsDaily.com. You can find him on Twitter at Lenzy, Lenzy 2108. And I think that'll do it. Thanks for tuning in. Have a good one, Matthew.
Yep. Thanks, Tom.